I wanted to be at Texas State. I chose to be at Texas State. I'm from Texas. That was important to me. I always knew if the right guy got this job, you better watch out.
You better watch out. This is Win Now or Get Bent, episode 174. If you don't already know, I'm Kev Tardello, coming to you on Thursday, October 10th. And we've got the Red Wolves in town. Texas State taking on the Arkansas State Red Wolves this Saturday, 6 p.m., UFCU Stadium. I know a lot of you sickos listening right now will be there. Hopefully maybe you're listening to this right now while you're on your way there. Hopefully so. We'll be out there as a unit, as a team. The Win Now or Get Bent crew will be out there. Me, the great wizard, Zachary Webb. He'll be making those cinematic recaps. And our great intern, Reese Largent, will be there. Hopefully you'll be there. Hopefully we can see the Bobcats enact some vengeance from that 77-31 beatdown from last year. That was a tough one. But we'll talk all about that. We'll preview this game. We've got a great guest with Chris Hudgison. He's been covering the Red Wolves for a long time up there in Arkansas. He's joining us. Fantastic stuff from him. So I hope you stick around and listen to that one from Chris. But before we get to all of that, this episode is brought to you by First Lockhart National Bank. As the largest financial institution headquartered in Caldwell County, First Lockhart National Bank expanded to San Marcos in 2018 and opened a state-of-the-art branch on Hunter Road in 2020. For the past 6 years, FLNB has provided a wide range of financial services that have significantly improved the quality of life for the San Marcos community and beyond. Whether you need personal or business checking accounts, business loans, or home mortgages, they've got you covered. Plus, they offer innovative services like video banking, business banking, and a top-of-the-line mobile banking app. FLNB is also a huge supporter of Texas State football, standing out as one of the largest initial investors in NIL deals for Bobcats players. Be sure to follow them on Twitter, X, at First Lockhart, and on Instagram, at First Lockhart. Shout out to my guy, Gil Hodges, Senior Vice President at FLNB in MLS, number 2475765, a proud Texas State grad and a diehard fan. We are thrilled to be partnering with Gil and FLNB all season long. You can find them at 2507 Hunter Road. That's 2507 Hunter Road, or give them a call at 512-504-7422. That's 512-504-7422. First Lockhart National Bank, member FDIC, equal housing lender. Terms and conditions may vary. Hey, Bobcat Nation. Looking for your next real estate move? McNabb & Company Real Estate Services has been proudly Bobcat owned and operated for over 15 years. They're your go-to team for buying, selling, investing, and managing properties, and everything in between. Whether you're a fan or an alum, they've got the local expertise and full service support you need. Call them today at 512-667-9129. That's 512-667-9129, or visit them at mcnabbandco.com. That's MCNABB, mcnabbandco.com. McNabb & Company, where Bobcats find their home. Give them a follow on Instagram, Facebook, and X at McNabb & Co. Thank you to Monica at McNabb, a day one Bobcat supporter. Now she's partnering with us this season. Check them out again, mcnabbandco.com, MCNABB, mcnabbandco.com. All right, just two at the top. So let's jump into this preview. Before we get to it, I'll cover this one on the next episode. This one, it's already pretty long interview with Chris. Great stuff in there, man. He's a wealth of information on the Bobcats opponent this week. But the NCAA has gotten rid of the national letter of intent. No more fax machines on recruiting. We'll talk about what that means on the next episode. I want to leave a little room for this Arkansas State preview. Some interesting stuff there. Also some interesting stuff about a private equity firm possibly combining 70 of the Power Four schools. They at least have a pitch. Doesn't seem like that pitch is going over well. But those two things, just giving you a little teaser. We'll talk about them coming up. But let's focus on this game and this Texas State opponent this week, Arkansas State, the Red Wolves. Most of you remember that game last year. I talked about it at the very top of the episode. 77-31. I believe it was the second most points ever allowed by the Texas State defense. 78, I think, is the record. Maybe 79 from Baylor way back in the day. But that was a pretty bad one. I know, you know what? It was a 75-0 loss to Baylor. I remember that. Maybe I'm thinking of how many points they put, the most points they put up. They almost got that with 77. Because even though they let 77 go, they also scored 77 last year. kind of a funky situation. But letting that amount of points go in a conference game is a different situation. It's pretty embarrassing. And Chris and I, we discussed that game, so I won't spend too much time talking about it. But what a weird game that was. Some strange happenings that we go over a little bit. But this game coming up on Saturday, Texas State is favored by 14.5 points. It's actually a little bit more than they were favored over Troy's 13.5 over Troy last week. So I was a little surprised by that, especially with Arkansas State coming off a win. Guess they had 2 losses before that, but those 2 losses were to Michigan. Remember them? National champions from last season. Granted, not nearly what they were last season, but they hung in there. It's still a pretty good team. And it was 28-18 in that game. And then they also played Iowa. I don't have that score on me. I didn't look at that score, but those are their 2 losses. They're 3-2 with those 2 losses. So I was surprised at the 14.5 until I really started like diving into the stats and looking at Arkansas State and what they've done this season. And I will say again, some of those stats for Arkansas State aren't as high as they probably would be if they hadn't played those 2 opponents right there, the 2 weeks before last week. But yeah, so overall in the series, 4-7, Arkansas State has the lead, but Texas State has won 3 of the last 4. Lost last season, but they won the 3 before that. So it was a one-sided series for a while. It's getting to be a little bit closer, which is nice. It's a team I've said for a while. It feels like a natural rival in conference for Texas State, given both teams' circumstances being the only teams in the Sun Belt in their state. So it seems like it would be a natural rivalry. Both teams are 3-2 this year. Arkansas State's wins over Central Arkansas, Tulsa, and South Alabama. South Alabama was an impressive one, way more low scoring than I expected last week. Saw some really good things from Jalen Rayner. Learned from Chris about their offensive line, how they got some more pieces, and I feel like that's why they looked a lot better against South Alabama. A lot of you remember that UCA game to start the year. There's a little bit of controversy over that touchdown, whether it was or wasn't. And then the Sun Belt came out and said it wasn't a touchdown against their own team, which was pretty interesting. Let's go with some Sun Belt stats for both these teams. We'll start with Arkansas State. They are 11th in offensive scoring in the Sun Belt at 21 points per game. They are 9th in scoring defense at allowing 30.2 points per game. It's out of 14 teams, by the way. So 11th and 9th, that's towards the bottom of the conference. 10th in total offense on total offense yards put out, 345 yards a game. 11th in total defense, allowing 434 yards per game. 13th out of 14th in rush offense, 93 yards per game. Remember that one. They don't run the ball very well. And then they are 14th in rush defense, 219 yards allowed per game. 7th in pass offense in the conference, right there at the middle spot, 251 yards per game, and 7th in pass defense at 215 yards per game. So there's not any area that they are doing compared to their Sun Belt conference opponents. They are in the bottom half of just about every category that we just spoke about there. Granted, I said it earlier, they had 2 really tough opponents that may have affected some of those stats, but we're still looking at a team that, even though they are 3-2, you're seeing why Texas State is favored. They have some the UCA win was a wonky one for sure. They beat Tulsa, but they haven't really had a true barn burner win. Texas State on the flip side, 3rd in scoring offense in the conference at 37.6 points per game, 4th in scoring defense at 25, 2nd in total offense, 454.8 yards per game, 455 you round up, and 2nd in total defense as well at 339 total yards allowed per game. So 2nd in both categories for Texas State. They're right there at the top on both sides of the ball. 6th in rush offense at 169 yards per game. That has gone down. They were getting close to about 200 a game. But they're 2nd in rush defense at 119 yards allowed per game. 2nd best passing offense at 286 yards per game. 9th best pass defense at 220. So looking at that 9th, that's the one area that when we've talked about this defense, we've said that if there is a weakness, teams can get over the top a little bit on them. They've had some injuries at safety. So there's some issues going on there. But for the most part, to be in the top four in all of those categories, top two in a lot of them, they don't lead in any specific category, but that just shows you what a well-rounded team this is in all of those categories. They are 3-2. They have two losses, but those two losses for Texas State were 4 points total combined, and both those teams are doing pretty well. I know Sam Houston State is 5-1. I believe Arizona State is 4-1, 3-1. I can look up their record really fast actually because I'm right here on it. Yeah, Arizona State, they're 4-1 right now. So I mean, we're talking about 9-2 combined record for Texas State's two losses. In both games they're at least hanging in it. So, even when I was pretty hard on this team after 172 after that Sam Houston State loss for sure, but this is still a very good team. But I think that is why I was so hard. It's because this team is so good. They are so talented that when you see a performance like that, it's frustrating because they can be so much better. They are one of the best teams in the Sun Belt. And when they clean it up and they do it right, they can get it humming. Jordan McLeod has more rushing yards, 173, than Arkansas State's leading rusher, their running back, Zach Wallace, who has 164, just to give you a little idea of their rush attack and how it hadn't been working out very well, which is interesting with their quarterback, Jalen Rainier. He was true freshman last season, burst onto the scene, was very much a dual threat. They've seemed to have cut back a lot on that this year, and it may be some issues with their offensive line. But speaking of Rayner, I have him as my first player to watch for Arkansas State. He's a true sophomore, was a true freshman last year, thrown onto the field 4 games into his true freshman season, and really did well. Was the quarterback of that game where the Bobcats lost. His stats, he doesn't have the best stats this year. He's not running as much as I was saying. He has 5 interceptions to 4 touchdowns, so more interceptions than touchdowns for him. He's about middle of the pack in yards in the Sun Belt Conference, but I still feel like he's one of the best quarterbacks in the Sun Belt. I give him a little bit of grace with a sophomore slump, and they've had some issues with their offensive line. With Jacob Bayer, maybe the best center in the Sun Belt Conference, he tore his ACL. Talking with Chris, you know what I mean, to step on the toes of that interview, but Bayer tore his ACL in the spring, and then was able to come back for after the first game of the season, which is remarkable. I don't know exactly how that works, but he's back, and I'm sure there's a bit of an acclimation period getting him used to game speed and everything. And then their offensive tackle, McCallan Thomas. I'm probably saying his first name wrong, but Thomas, they were without him up until last week, and he's an all Sun Belt player as well. So getting those pieces back and getting a groove with that offensive line, I think you'll see Rayner start to put up more stats. Bobcats might be catching them at a right time where it's not quite gelled yet with Thomas just coming back. So we'll see how that goes. They're going to have a pretty big order coming up with this Tech State defensive line, that's for sure. But just because Rayner has the low stats, he can really do some terrific things. I mentioned it on the last pod. The 2-minute drill that he pulled off against South Alabama was really impressive to me for a young quarterback. And when he has time and he's going, they can really do some things. And Texas State has struggled against quarterbacks that can move a little bit more than get out of the pocket when it gets messy. And Rayner has been good at doing that. So can't sleep on that quarterback just because you look at those stats and look at the situation going on with Arkansas State. He can still really play. Another guy who can really play for them is Corey Rucker, getting him back into the fold for Arkansas State. I'm sure they really like that. He's got 19 catches for 349 yards and 2 touchdowns. I didn't put down his yards per catch average, but it was 18 point something. So he's a deep threat, no doubt about it. It's a name that it feels like a blast from the past. He played for Arkansas State for a little bit and then transferred to South Carolina last year before transferring back this year, the rare retransfer. So Corey Rucker back in the mix for Arkansas State. I mentioned the offensive line getting pieces back together from injury. Jacob Bayer and Thomas on that offensive line specifically, because that was an issue. You'll hear that from Chris quite a bit. So getting those 2 pieces back are pretty big for this offensive line. So that's something to look out for. This defense, very opportunistic defense. They're second in the conference in interceptions with 10. JMU has, 7. They have 7 interceptions. JMU has 10. That's where I was going with that, because the 10 from JMU is impressive. And it's basically 2 a game at this point. Dante Joyner and Trevian Thomas both have 2 each. Joyner also has 5 pass breakups, so some pretty good DBs. They also have Charles Wilkes at linebacker, really good player himself. Their defense, while even when I'm reading the stats, and no, they're not at the top of the conference, their defense is improved from last season. And this is a defense that actually scored some touchdowns on the Bobcats last year. May have been like 3. I refuse to look up that game. I don't even want to go back to it. I typed up the recap for it, and I just wanted to put it away after that one, because that was a wild one. But yeah, it went a little crazy. There's always a team where Butch Jones always has strong special teams as well, opportunistic special teams where they'll flip the field in certain situations. So that's something to keep in mind and watch with this team. But even with all of that, with all of the things that they have going right for them with Arkansas State, I still feel like this is a Texas State win. What was that spread? 14.5. That seems high to me for this Arkansas State team. Is pretty good. They're not in the bottom of the barrel of the Sun Belt. I mean, getting a double-digit win on them is going to be a pretty hard situation. I think they'll still get 10-point win around that. I don't think they'll beat the spread, but I think they'll, if they can do what they do, if they do that GJ Kinney thing they do, where they come out and they can get a couple touchdowns in the first quarter, build a bit of a lead, and then unleash the stable of running backs they have. We saw it some last week against Troy, where we start to see Torrance Burgess getting in there and Deion Hankins getting in there. If they can start unleashing some of these guys, got to get Lincoln Perry in the game. Arkansas State transfer as well. He didn't get any carries last week, but he has 4 touchdowns on the year. So if they can unload the running back room, get a lead, unload that running back room, milk the clock, time of possession, not go fully conservative, obviously. Don't just try and run the clock out after the first quarter. But if you can control the clock, that time of possession, and win that time of possession battle, that's going to go a really long way for Texas State. And I think it's gonna hinge on this running attack for the Bobcats, because they're not very good stopping the run. And the Bobcats have a lot of running backs they can utilize. They even have a quarterback, like I was saying, he has more yards than Arkansas State's leading rusher. But at the same breath, Texas State has a terrific passing game as well. You don't want to totally abandon that. But if they can get close to that 50-50 divide, run pass, I think that'll go a long way for this team. And I think they learned a lot about themselves against Troy, as far as the discipline, as far as not always having to go for it on 4th down. As far as that time of possession, controlling the clock, utilizing your running backs. If you have the advantage where if someone's not running the ball right, or if somebody fumbles, something happens, you have a lot of other guys you can replace at that position. So I think utilizing that, and on the flip side, defensively for the Bobcats, this is a team they're not going to run the ball a whole lot. It's a little different from last year. Despite having like Cross and Wallace, some really good guys who can run the ball. Rayner can run the ball well at quarterback. They're not looking to do that. They're passing the ball more. And so they're going to have to get after the quarterback. The DBs haven't been the strongest unit. They have made some good plays, and they have a good starting unit. They don't have a ton of depth there. So it starts to give as the game goes. But if they can get after that quarterback and try and keep him in the pocket, because he gets out of the pocket, he can start to do some things. Obviously, that's going to be a pretty hard deal. I know he maybe I don't know if it's going to be a spy situation on Rayner, maybe not, because they are passing it quite a bit. But I'd imagine they're still going to try and test their running, because they have their offensive line pieces back as well. So it's not going to be all passing for Arkansas State. But they're gonna have to really get after it. And it's interesting looking at Texas State's rush defense. They're second in the conference, allowing 119 yards a game, and that's after letting 300, just about, it was like 293 against Sam Houston State. They're still, I mean, they've been holding teams to near or under that century mark for rushing. So I can imagine they don't want to test it too much, Arkansas State, but we'll see. But I'm confident in the Bobcats. I was confident going into the season. I also think that loss that we talked about, 77-31, you tired of hearing me say the score? I can imagine. So I'm tired of saying it. That's hanging in their heads. I mean, GJ Kinney this week at his press conference on Tuesday was like, a high school team could have beat us. last season. That's how bad he felt his team played, which is a pretty brutal assessment to throw that on your team. But it's a lot of transfers, no doubt, on this Texas State roster. But there's a lot of players that were on this team last year that remember that, and I imagine it's circled on their calendar because even the UTSA, there's history there. Troy, there was history there, but it's that one has to sting these guys personally that played in that game last season, where they're just like, we let that happen in conference. So I think it'll be a little bit of vengeance for the Bobcats. The series will be 5-7 after Saturday. That's how I feel. I'm confident in this Texas State team. But we'll leave it there. I don't want to spend too much time because it's a pretty long interview. It's over a half hour. I know that, with our guy Chris Hudgison, sports director at K8 News in Northeast Arkansas, Southeast Missouri, Northwest Arkansas, Southeast Missouri. I met him in 2018. He came to San Marcos. I mentioned it when I interviewed him, but it was one of the first times seeing someone travel in the Sun Belt to San Marcos. So it was noteworthy. So Chris, he appreciates San Marcos, and he's with me. Make this a rivalry. Let's get the state hate going between Texas State and Arkansas State. But yeah, let's get to Chris. Great interview there. I really appreciate him jumping on. And here he is, Chris Hudgison. All right, I have a very special guest joining me. It is the sports director for K8 News in Northeast Arkansas and Southeast Missouri. It's my guy, Chris Hudgison. Chris, great to be talking with you. Great to get to preview this Red Wolves Bobcats matchup we got coming up.
This is going to be like the most fun belt matchup since last week. Because this has been honestly a very bizarre year in the conference. So it's fitting that's okay, two teams we kind of penciled would kind of be near the top of the West. They're facing off, but it's incredibly early in the year, which is kind of throwing me off.
It is, because usually it's a little bit of a later matchup, but it's an earlier one. I mean, we remembered that one last year. Was it the second to last game of the season? It may have been the third to last game of the season. 77-31. I know that one's burned into the memories of lots of Bobcats. So this is going to be, as you said, the most Sun Belt game they're going to have coming up.
I mean, there's so much. I think we touched on this. It is kind of a growing rivalry, especially on the A-State perspective, where there's no in-state opponents until next year when they finally play Arkansas. Historically, the biggest rival A-State has is Louisiana. Then after that, it's like a gap. There's Troy for the historical reasons because they've been in the conference forever. But then after that, it's who's the next biggest rival? And I honestly would say Texas State is in the conversation because of how much crossover there's been in the series. There's been very bizarre games in the series, and that's one of the things that's kind of helped in. It's okay, Texas is part of Arkansas State's recruiting footprint, so the Red Wolves and Bobcats are going after recruits quite often, so it's definitely one of those up-and-coming rivalries for A-State.
Yeah, I would say, especially in the recruiting game, there is more crossover between these two programs, and for Texas State at least, than any other team they're going up against in the Sun Belt. And I think it is that proximity. And we were talking earlier. It's ripe for a rivalry. The two respective state teams in their respective states, I should say, Texas State and then Arkansas State, both are somewhat on an island with no other in-state rivals in the conference. UTA was a basketball school; they left. Little Rock was a basketball school. They left as well. So after that, it's wide open. And for myself, I've thought it's a perfect team for it to be a rivalry. Especially you went back through it and you talked about the games. There's some of these teams where the Bobcats they're 0 for 10 against Louisiana. They have some pretty lopsided records against these Sun Belt teams. Arkansas State, it's 4-7 all time, in favor of Arkansas State. That's a little bit close. There has been some of these really good games. There's that 2020 game where Brady McBride went off, and it was, what was that, 47-45? That was a crazy game. Maybe it might have been 48-45. But it's been a really fun series. Even going back to last year and seeing the blowout by Arkansas State, it was personal with that one. It has to be if you throw up 77 on a conference opponent. I mean, granted, they got the Bobcats were giving them a lot of I can't remember all the scoring. I'm pretty sure there were a lot of defensive scores and turnovers that set up a lot of some easy touchdowns. So it wasn't like they were
Yeah.
like trying to step on the throats of the Bobcats, but
It
they're
just
still able to put up 77. But it's a
it just
crazy series.
happened. Like last year's game, and I've told people this because I mean, I already got the gray hairs going anyway because I'm old, but it's like I've covered college football in some capacity since 2008. Last year's game was the most bizarre game I've ever covered. I've covered SEC, I've covered Sun Belt, I've covered SWAC. 77-31 happened, and you had essentially a 8 to 10 minute span where the Arkansas State offense did not touch the ball yet scored points, either special teams or a litany of pick sixes. There's no game I'm ever going to cover that's going to top the ridiculousness of that game.
Okay, I'm glad you brought that. I see, because it's painful for people in San Marcos to go back
I
and
understand
look at
it.
that
You
one.
should be.
So I hadn't done it, and I was like, I'm pretty sure there was a time, and you just said it, that 8 minute window where they're just scoring on special teams and defense. I was like, it wasn't a game where Arkansas State was keeping the starters in up 40 points in the fourth quarter. It just kind of happened. It was an onslaught last season.
I mean, Butch Jones said it himself. We talked to him Tuesday in his weekly press conference. The best way he described it was like, it was a strange game. Yeah, pretty much. It was very much strange where, hey, do you expect a Jaquez Cross kickoff return for a touchdown? Sure, he's one of the best return threats in the game. Do you expect a Dane Motley pick six and then a pick six by Malik Straker within what felt like seconds of each other? No, not really. A bizarro scoop and score from Travion Thomas. He's made a lot of plays on the football. That one was kind of a different one for the ledger. So, yeah, it's going to be definitely one in the Arkansas State annals of bizarre and crazy games, and they've had a couple, and it's going to be definitely in the Sun Belt ledger too.
Hey, hopefully we have another crazy one on Saturday. I'm enjoying all the craziness. It was funny. GJ Kinney this week was like, well, a high school team could have beat us that day. He was really real brutal about it this week, talking about that game and how bad it was. So I know that's in their memory for sure. This is a game that a lot of transfers for the Bobcats, but this is one that they'll still definitely remember. And of course, the Red Wolves are going to remember it. You got Ray Norris, he's back this year. A lot of you just mentioned Cross, he's back this year. This is going to be in a very interesting game, especially for Arkansas State. Seeing where they're coming fresh off that South Alabama win, that was a good win. Low scoring game, surprisingly. And Arkansas State is after a little bit of a slow start, they're starting to come around a little bit. So it's going to be a real interesting matchup paired against this Texas State defense that really likes to get after the quarterback.
And vice versa. This Red Wolves defense has really improved. Throw out the Iowa State game because the Cyclones have now done that to everybody. So now looking at that score line, when it first happened, I was like, okay, this is not a great way to end non-conference play. But then you're seeing the way the Cyclones have kind of done that to a whole lot of teams. It's like, okay, take that with a grain of salt. But the Michigan game was kind of a little litmus test of like, okay, the A-State defense is really taking a step, mostly enforcing takeaways. That's been something defensive coordinator Rob Harley has talked about from the start of the season. We need to force more takeaways. They're finally doing it either by getting pressure on the quarterback, linebackers kind of being in the right spots and in the secondary. So I think it's a couple straight games where at least 3 straight games where the Red Wolves have forced a takeaway. I think 4 if you want to throw in the Tulsa game because they had a couple picks against Michigan. They had a pick or two against Iowa State, and then the Justin Parks interception last week, which turns out to be one of the bigger kind of talking points of that game. Looking at it now, it was an 18-16 game, but what folks may not realize, South Alabama went for it twice on fourth down in Red Wolves territory, fourth and short. One of them, Brian Whitehead, made a great stop. The other, Justin Parks, had an interception. Had they kicked field goals either one of those times, maybe it's a different ball game. Who knows?
Interesting, because that was an issue with Texas State as well. They were going for it too much on fourth down against Sam Houston State. They didn't do it at all against Troy. Results in a win. There was even a play where they punted the ball, got a roughing the kicker, got a first down. It led to a touchdown. So it is, these high-powered offenses like South Alabama, Texas State, they've got to learn to slow it down like Butch Jones does. He's been pretty good about that, especially that 2 minutes from Jalen Raynor at the end of that South Alabama game. That really impressed me because this is a young guy. This is a sophomore, true sophomore, 2 minutes going up against a pretty formidable opponent You got to get down the field, and he was able to do it. I mean, the growth of Jalen Raynor, I came into the season talking about where I feel like he's up there, probably the best quarterback in the conference eventually, but if not, he's up there right now. I mean, he's right there near the top.
He,
But talk to me about Raynor. Have you gotten to get to
yeah,
know him, obviously, and just anything you can about him?
Jalen's fascinating because where folks may or may not realize he was an early enrollee last year. So he was literally dropped in the fire, so to speak, spring practice last year. So didn't have that spring semester of high school because he graduated early and learned the offense from the jump. So when the point came where he took over game 4 or thereabouts last year, he could kind of pick up on it and had the year that he had. This year's been interesting because one, you've seen more teams have more tape on him, so he's kind of had to change his approach a little bit. Last year it was a lot more deep balls. We kind of saw that a little bit last week against South Al, a lot more deep throws to Corey Rucker, connected on a couple of those, and those proved big in a couple scoring drives. What's been interesting this year, he hasn't run the ball as much as he did last year. So maybe that's an issue of, hey, trying to kind of get more in tune with the passing game. Granted, he's got a lot more receivers to throw to this year than last year. But what I noticed the South Alabama game and that 2-minute drive, especially, the longest pass he had was 11 yards on that drive. Everything was 11 yards and under. I had to go back and look because, like, one, how the drive unfolded, he marched him down in essentially less than a minute, and it was essentially every throw was either first down or like a nice little 6-yard chunk there. So the thing that's impressed me the most lately with Jalen, he's taking a lot better care of the football. He took some lumps, just be honest about it, especially against Michigan and Iowa State, where didn't have the greatest ball security in the world, and that's not the greatest thing to do against two top 20 teams, and they made him pay for it. So the biggest thing I noticed, they had the bye week, and the biggest kind of change I noticed, especially that South Alabama win, he took a lot better care of the football. Even took a sack on third down. Flip side, it took A-State out of field goal range, but he didn't throw it in harm's way that he could have probably done maybe if this was week 1 or week 2 of the season.
Mm. And that's an interesting situation there with Jalen Raynor, especially you talking about where he got in there before he should have been in high school, should have been going to prom or anything, and he's in there at spring practice already coming along. The tape being out there, that is the one thing. That is when the freshman phenoms, they come on, they have a great season, but then there's more tape. It probably goes into a little bit of that sophomore slump people talk about. And you talk about where he's throwing the ball more. Do you think he should run the ball more, or is it better for this offense when he's just humming in the pocket?
It's a little bit of both. Lately, A-State has had trouble in the run game, especially with their running backs, where it's been 3 yards in a cloud of dust, so to speak. You haven't had a lot of big runs from Zach Wallace and Jaquez Cross like we saw last year. And a little bit of that goes into the state of the offensive line, where A-State has not had the full complement on the offensive line until last week against South Alabama, where Jacob Bayer, all Sun Belt, everything center, tore his ACL during spring ball, yet came back, only missed 1 game, which is just well short of a miracle and incredible. Flip side, McKeelan Thomas, their all Sun Belt tackle, he got injured during fall camp. He missed the first 4 games, so we didn't really see him. First 4 games, we didn't see him until the South Alabama game last week, and it was such a big difference on the offensive line in terms of protection. Yeah, there were going to be some first game jitters just because he hasn't been in the lineup all year, but it was the best the offensive line had played arguably all season. And so getting those guys back may be the difference in the run game. And then maybe on the flip side, there were a couple design runs for Rayner early in that first half, but then you just didn't see him as much in the second half, where it was more of a, hey, we kind of see a thing we can exploit. Medium and intermediate throws against South Alabama, and you kind of notice that especially in the second half, which led to their only touchdown of the game, that throw to Tyler Little. With the exception of a couple deep balls to Rucker, it was a lot of medium and intermediate throws. So we'll see kind of how that bodes coming up Saturday. Are we going to see him run some more? That's going to be an interesting question.
Yeah, it's a great point that you bring up, especially with Bayer. Oh, I didn't realize the ACL tear was in spring. I heard about that. And I knew he came back quick, but that is remarkably quick. Where medicine has come, especially with ACL tears. It used to be almost a career death sentence for guys back in the day. Now they can come back a few months later. But to get those two pieces, that center and the tackle in there on this offensive line and get that cohesion, I bet that has gone a long way for running. And I could see Raynor probably running a little bit more this week, considering Texas State, they've been really good against the run. They had the one game against Sam Houston State where they almost got 300 yards. Otherwise, they've kept teams below 100 yards or right at it. But where they have gotten burned is quarterbacks who can run, like Levet at ASU, Watson at Sam Houston State. Whenever they play these quarterbacks that do utilize their legs, when the pocket gets messy and they get out of the pocket, and they do a little ad-libbing where they throw the ball or take off with their legs, that's given the Bobcats some problems. They have a very aggressive defense, but then once you get past that initial aggression, there's a lot of yardage to be picked up. So I could see that with Ray Norch running a little bit more this week, especially having those two big pieces on the offensive line back. That gives a lot of clarity to how it looked at the beginning of the season to now, because those are their offensive linemen. They get lost in the trenches a little bit, and if you're on the outside looking in, you don't think about those pieces like I was. But hearing that now, I'm like, oh yeah, okay. Those are two big names for this offensive line. Those are two guys who have both been on all Sun Belt teams, if I'm pretty sure. I know Bayer has definitely. But this is it's interesting to hear that they finally have all their pieces on that O line.
Yeah, and in the meantime, they've you know thrown so many younger guys in the mix on the O line, like Riley McGahee. Noah Smith has gotten a lot of care, a lot of play. Mason Myers like started at center the first game against UCA, and so having a guy with like essentially freshman sophomore experience getting those reps early on has helped in terms of kind of building some more depth on the offensive line. Where you know for folks that don't know, it's a mishmash of guys that Butch Jones recruited, like a McKeelan Thomas, like a Riley McGahee, or like a Noah Smith, and then you have a mix of the transfers. Jacob Bayer's a Lamar transfer. This is his second year in the program, and he's been pretty much a lock at center since the very beginning. Then you got guys like EJ Nodoma Ogar, who's a transfer too. So it's not quite a patchwork O line like a lot of other teams we've kind of seen around the conference, but it's a nice mix of guys that have been in the program a couple years, along with sprinkle in some guys where you need an immediate need, maybe at a tackle spot, maybe at a guard spot. For the most part, it has worked, especially the last season and in the first couple games of this year.
Yeah, Butch Jones. It seemed like a couple years ago, Arkansas State fans were somewhat souring on him, and it's really it's you can start to see the product. You can see it materialize the last couple seasons. How is the feeling around Butch Jones? Are people coming around to him?
It's a little bit. It's kind of a mix and match where you've got some that are just less than pleased with him because, granted, it's year 4 under Butch Jones, and now you're seeing other teams around the conference. They're kind of looking at what James Madison's been able to do under Chesney and what ULM's been able to do under Vincent, and thinking, "Hey, why can't this be done sooner?" But then what folks haven't realized, and then Butch Jones has kind of tried to tell folks, he said year 0, and for once in coach speak, he was right. Because usually if you hear a coach say year 0, you're like, okay, what are you trying to go with this? And in this case, this is a rare instance of he kind of has a point. For example, offensive line play. Blake Anderson did more in terms of recruiting SEAL guys. So the litany of wide receivers, they had All-Americans like Jonathan Adams, Omar Bayless. There was a detriment to that. There was not a lot of depth on the offensive line. So when Butch Jones got here, with the style of offense he likes to run, which is predicated on line of scrimmage and tight ends, there was a dearth there. So he has essentially had to rebuild A-State from the trenches. There were skill guys. There was talent there in the skill positions. And then it was a matter of, okay, where can you get in and fit in and kind of find an advantage? And it's been special teams. I have never called so many special teams highlights in my sportscast as I did under the Butch Jones era, where it's like, okay, field goal. Hey, how did you find this punter from the middle of nowhere in Michigan? Ryan Hiker's now one of the best punters in the country. And he was a D2 transfer. Clune Van Andel, a Michigan guy who's now at Arkansas State, reigning Sun Belt, special teams player of the week. It's been interesting to see they found ways to bring guys in from just Michigan to Arkansas is a way. So the fact he's been able to find so many guys from his Michigan connections and bring them here has been interesting. But I think it's a matter of fan base wise. You've got folks in the fan base not as happy about the play calling on offense. So they're thinking, hey, this is a little bit too predictable. South Alabama was kind of the example of, hey, they're throwing a lot more than running the ball. Maybe that's kind of a turn there, but it's a matter of you still have folks in the fan base. One, it's kind of a slower build than they realized it would be. And so they thought, hey, year 3, year 4, hey, we're playing at Iowa State. We should be more competitive. They were not expecting 56 some odd to 7. So you can kind of see it on both ends why the fan base is less than pleased. But on the other end, they do like the progress. They got to a bowl game last year. Obviously, was a controversial onside kick away from possibly winning. So you could kind of see both sides of the coin with the fan base and how they feel about Butch Jones.
Yeah, and and when you think about it with him when he took over 4 years ago, this is year 4 for Butch Jones. I'm pretty sure that's right.
Yep.
And when the transfer portal was around, but it wasn't the level that it is now, where yeah, people we would still see these pretty large classes where they'd go over 25, maybe closer to 30. Now where you bring up Chesney, even GJ Kinney here at Texas State last year when he came in and it was a quick start. They came in and beat Baylor right away. They were able to completely flip the roster from when they got in there. I mean, Kinney last year, I think it was 53. Yeah, it's 39 transfers, 53-man recruiting class for his very first class. Because that's the other thing is the scholarship allotment, the 25 cap, that went away, where you can use more per recruiting class. You're not as beholden to a lot of these restrictions as Jones was 4 years ago when he took over. Because now if he'd taken over 2 years ago, they don't have to worry about a year 0. You can just flip the roster. You can just whole new deal.
Pretty much.
The year 0 deal with offensive line, I feel like that's always the biggest problem with new coaches when they take over, especially after taking over for a successful coach that probably brought the best offensive lineman with them. So I kind of understand that year 0 for Butch Jones.
Yeah, it was. I mean, when that happened way back when, good gracious, it was like 2021. They brought in a transfer quarterback, James Blackman, who's pretty much literally thrown to the wolves. Where, hey, you get to start. You may not have the best offensive line around you, so good luck around that. And it was such a bizarre year where transfers made the bulk of were some key contributors. You had James Blackman. You had the most obscure stat in Arkansas State history where Alan Lamar led the nation in kickoff return yards. I didn't know you could do that until that year. I found out that maybe A-State fans found out that out the hard way, I guess. But he had a fantastic All-American year as a returner. But we've kind of noticed this across the board all 4 years so far. You've seen a mix of guys that have been in the program from the jump since Butch Jones got here to guys now that you have that mix of portal guys. So now if you look at their starting offense, for example, Zach Wallace, Jaquez Cross, transfers. Jaquez Cross was at Purdue. How he found them and being an Arkansas guy, fascinating in that regard. Zach Wallace was a UT Martin transfer before he came to A-State. Then, no, McKeelan Thomas is one of the day one guys. There's not a lot of them left that have been essentially in that initial recruiting class. McKeelan Thomas was one of them from Little Rock, and he's just grown and developed through the program. Justin Parks, starting linebacker. He's been a 4-year starter. He's pretty much started for A-State the entire time Butch Jones has been here. So that's been kind of the most fascinating tell with this team this year. It is a veteran team, but it's a mix of transfers, and then you've got a couple guys that have just been in the program since the jump. So it's been an interesting climb to see it, where they're a whole lot better now than they were in year 1, but now A-State fans want to see that next step. Obviously, a whole lot better Sun Belt record and contend for the West title.
Speaking of some of those transfers, we've talked about the crossover for Texas State and Arkansas State. Got Malik Hornsby as a Red Wolf now. We even heard Butch Jones saying they want to get him more involved in the offense and see if he can get a little vengeance on his old team this upcoming week. But there's a lot of that crossover. There's Lincoln Perry at running back for Texas State. Kelly Damphus is the school president for Texas State from Arkansas State. I'm sure there's more that I'm missing there, but there seems to be a lot of that crossover that can add to that bad blood a little bit.
Yeah, Hornsby is definitely of, and it's wild to say that because I covered Lincoln Perry a lot. Great guy.
Mhm.
Hornsby's the most interesting crossover just because one, when he left, it's like you could have stayed maybe, but who knows how everything was going down there when he left. And then when he signed, it was such a surprise, so to speak. One, when they listed him as a wide receiver, when we initially heard, hey, he's considering coming to A-State, we assumed, okay, quarterback. Jalen Raynor's here. How's this gonna work? But then once we heard, hey, wide receiver, I'm like, okay, y'all may be onto something. So when he was here for spring practice, there was a lot of Malik Hornsby direct snaps and jet sweeps. You saw throws here and there, but they were mostly using him in that kind of wildcat-ish quarterback kind of role. Now, this year, we've kind of noticed one, there hasn't been a lot of touches. The ones that we've seen this season have been more of the jet sweep variety. I think there was a direct snap. They did try a direct snap looking at South Al, but it didn't really materialize much last week. So I'm fascinated to see how they're going to utilize him this week. Flip side, there's a whole lot of receivers to throw to. So now you're wondering, obviously, Corey Rucker has had a fantastic year. Courtney Jackson, a little bit down on numbers wise compared to last year, but he's still a big time threat. Adam Jones still kind of a main, and Reagan Ely have been kind of, your mainstay 3 and 4 guys. So I'm wondering to see kind of how Hornsby fits in this week.
Yeah, and Malik Hornsby, it's interesting you talk about when him going to Arkansas State and playing receiver. Before he came to Texas State, he was being recruited by Nebraska to play receiver. He chose Texas State because he wanted to play quarterback. And obviously TJ Finley got in there, so Hornsby wasn't getting a lot of reps behind center. If he would, it was usually a designed run, and he had 6 rushing touchdowns. I mean, he's an athletic guy, but it just didn't seem like it was going to materialize behind center for him here. And then with the whole Jaden DeLaura fiasco that happened in January, where he transferred in and Finley transferred out, there was a lot of unknowns at quarterback. So I could see why Hornsby left. It was a surprise that he transferred in conference and stayed at receiver when you'd think he could stay at receiver at Texas State in a pretty good offense. But I feel like that tells me something may have soured here, and he's opting to leave and stay in conference and do all of that. But I think he's an incredibly dynamic player. And if they can figure something out, the jet sweeps, the wildcat, they were doing a lot of good stuff with the wildcat with him last season where they'd snap it, some read option, type deals where sometimes he'd hand it off, sometimes he'd just take off. So a pretty dynamic player that they have waiting in the wings. It's great you mentioned Lincoln Perry. He's back this year after he's got 4 touchdowns already this year after tearing his ACL. He missed all of last season. Not the same situation as Bayer there, but they're not used. They didn't use him at all last week. They have a lot of running backs, so he may not even get in there. But I imagine Arkansas State, they're going to see Lincoln Perry get in there and get some carries. He's still a pretty terrific back, even if he's the second or third option on this team now.
And a versatile guy. That's what I noticed when he played up here at A-State. It's like, had some pretty good hands and definitely, had the power you needed as a running back and made folks miss. So I'll be surprised. If he doesn't have at least 5 touches on Saturday, I'll be stunned.
Yeah, me too. Me too. And you'll see him all over special teams, not necessarily returning kicks, but he's out there blocking. He's out there on punt return. He's the versatility you said. He's the one of the ultimate teammates where he's out there willing to do anything that they need. Especially coming in, and he wasn't recruited by GJ Kinney. His best year was under Spavital when he led the team in rushing in 2022. So for him to stick around even through an injury and everything and be with this team, I think that says a lot about his character and who he is. And he's definitely somebody where if they need someone on the podium to come talk to the media or at an event or anywhere to shake hands with people, Lincoln Perry's out there. He's a terrific import from Jonesboro. We greatly appreciate getting to talk to Lincoln here.
So you're saying he's the statesman of San Marcos?
Somewhat. There's a few of, he's one of them. He's one of the statesmen, I'll say. He's out there quite a bit for the Bobcats representing. I'd say like Kinney and Damphus, those are probably the big statesmen, but with the team representative, they're going to go get Perry.
I don't blame you. I mean, like, model citizen when he was up here at A-State. I mean, nothing but good things, to say about him, on and off the field. So I'm just happy to see him just, back on the field again. Because when the injury happened, I was like, gosh, he was just kind of getting to the cusp. And I thought, okay, if he stays steady, he's kind of on that cusp of maybe having like throwing an all Sun Belt season together. He's got all the capabilities of the world to be that.
I agree. It's hard for him to get through this running back room this year. It's pretty heavy, but if he sticks around next year, for the Bobcats, when some of these guys they'll expire their eligibility, I think he'll be able to get in there more. But I'm with you. He has all the tools to be an all Sun Belt player, and the trajectory was on its way until that injury. But he's working hard through it already. Well, hey, this has been fantastic. Can't thank you enough, Chris, for meeting up and talking with me. I know we met up. I actually saw you in New Orleans for Sunbelt Media Day. That was great to run into you. I saw you in 2018 when you came to San Marcos. You went on the road. It was the first. It always sticks in my memory because it was the first time I'd seen a reporter come on the road to San Marcos cover a game. It was pretty dark times for Texas State in that time.
Yeah.
And as we were talking about, Texas State's kind of far away from some of these other Sun Belt schools. So that was pretty cool that you came out to San Marcos. I know you have 2 kids now. I know how that game goes. So I can't imagine you'll be there this weekend, but will you be out there, or how are you going to be watching the game?
I'll be in the corner of a sports office just firing up Plus and just kind of watching and kind of tracking. We do a 20-minute show on, A-State football game day. So it's like, hey, let's chop some highlights together, kind of track everything from there. So I'll be in a comfy chair, but I'll be kind of like, I'm kind of old school. I love being on the sideline and shooting with the camera, and folks will be like, hey, you're on the air. What do you like doing more? I'm like, I'm kind of weird. I like shooting games more than just about anything. I just kind of like being in the vibes and kind of being in the whole atmosphere of the stadium and everything like that. So, yeah, it was cool to make that trip in San Marcos. I think I've crossed off 10 of the 14 Sun Belt teams I've been to. The only ones I haven't been able to go to: Old Dominion, James Madison, App State, and Coastal. I crossed Marshall off the list last year, and that was a fascinating trip. It was like, oh, you just drive across Kentucky, and now I'm there. It was a cool trip, and I'm like, I may have to try to do a power ranking of like, hey, Sun Belt cities, rank them so far. I just have to get around to it, and then I'll make everybody mad in the conference. They're like, hey, you ranked us too high or low. I'm like, I'm sorry.
No one's going to say you ranked us too high. I promise you. And San Marcos is number 1. I'm already mad at it if San Marcos is number 1. I'm already mad. It hadn't even been created.
Yeah, who I would pick for number 1 in terms of road trips would make people mad. Like, especially the team I would cover. I was like, I got Lafayette up there just because of food.
Hey, I was going to say,
food and vibes.
Hey, come on. My producer's going to hate it because he would make me stay.
To be fair, when I went, that was during the Hudspeth run. And that was kind of one of the peaks before Napier showed up. So it was kind of the rise of that fan base and everything like that. And I happened to go, it was like how old am I? This is a how long have you covered Sunbelt moment. It was a Tuesday night game, 2012. Your head coaches were Gus Malzahn and Mark Hudspeth. I am old.
Wow. Gus Malzahn. There's a connection there with GJ Kinney.
Yeah.
He talks about him all the time. So there you go. Nice round. Finish that circle there.
Everything is a circle in the Sun Belt.
Absolutely. Well, Chris, I appreciate you so much. Looking forward to this game on Saturday, and we'll be catching up much more with you. Thanks again, Chris.
Thank you. Take care.
This episode is brought to you by TGC LLC, the GalindoCollective.com. That's GALINDO, GalindoCollective.com. A team of professional consultants dedicated to helping others realize their business potential through people, planning, and practice. Their services cover a wide range of areas such as business strategy, marketing, human resources, and financial planning. If you own property or a business and want to maximize its profitability, contact TGC at thegalindocollective.com and follow their social media platforms on Twitter at TGC_LLC and on Instagram and Facebook at the Galindo Collective. Shout out to my guy, Rick Galindo, a true Tech State sicko, a Tech State grad. He's been with us since last season, all through this season, and he's even helping us get some of you sickos to the game with our TGC ticket giveaway. We've got another one for the Arkansas State game. Hit me up at wnogbkef@gmail.com. That's wnogbkef@gmail.com if you want to be submitted into the drawing we will have. Otherwise, we're just going to be calling for names on Twitter. So look out for that on Twitter as well. Thanks again to the Galindo Collective and Rick Galindo. Again, that's the GalindoCollective.com, Galindo, the GalindoCollective.com. One more for our guys at Chilzey, ChillZey.com. You can get custom tumblers, custom koozies. If you're watching on our Win Now or Get Bent channel, you can see me holding up both of those beautiful things. I've got this Win Now or Get Bent tumbler from ChillZey.com. As you can see, we've got the Mad Cat on the side there. If you order 6 or more of these bad boys from Chillzey and you punch in Bobcats at the checkout, they are $15 a piece, which is a great deal for these here. They also have custom koozies. Custom koozies. On the tumblers koozies, you can get any logo you want. You can see the Win Now or Get Bent logo on some of these koozies we got. Any color you need. We'll be handing these out at the game. Look for me at the Arkansas State game. I'll have some koozies. You see me, shout out Win Now or Get Bent. I got you a koozie right away. Check them out, chillzey.com, ChillZey.com. Shout out to my guy there, Dennis Redding, a true Tech State sicko and a Tech State grad, and his son Bryson. He's a future Tech State grad, already a Tech State sicko. Can't thank them enough. I have a blast handing out these koozies to everyone, and it's great to be partnering with them again this season. Again, chillzey.com, ChillZey.com. Check out our Patreon page, patreon.com/WinNowOrGetBent. Our awesome intern, Reese Largent, he's cracking away on there, putting up some great stuff. I'm going to get on there, putting some nice content on that Patreon page. Check out our merch site, WNOGB.com. I've got awesome shirts like I'm wearing right here. Bam, got the Sicko shirt back in the mix. Wearing that guy. Check us out on that. Check out our YouTube channel, Win Now or Get Bent on YouTube. Like, subscribe, comment, all that good stuff. Sign up your friends, family, enemies, whatever you got. Any way we can get those numbers up over there. Check us out on Twitter at Win Now or Get Bent and on Instagram at WNOGB. Still got to uniform those two. I'll get on that. Big shout out to First Lockhart National Bank, to McNabb, to TGC LLC, and to Chillzey.com for sponsoring the pod. Shout out to my guy, the great wizard, Zachary Webb, for always making this pod look amazing. Look out for his cinematic recap coming out after the Arkansas State game. Go back and revisit some of those as well on our YouTube channel. We've got a special little section just for those. And shout out again to my guy, Reese Largent. Check out that Patreon page. And thank you to you sickos. Without you, we'd be shouting into the void. Thank you for always tuning in and checking us out and helping us grow and helping us continue to cover the Tech State Bobcats. We're all very passionate about the Bobcats over here at the pod, and it's so nice to have a community of people that share that passion with us. So can't thank you enough. But all right, everybody, we'll see you at UFCU Stadium on Saturday. Win now or get bent.